Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'd like to talk about what probably would not be very accurate to call atheist morality. But it's a question I've gotten a number of times from some of the more thoughtful atheists. One of the reasons why I'm not real big on the idiots who show up in comment sections is because they obscure the people who aren't idiots. And there are atheists who are not idiots. And I talk to some of them. For selection reasons I've discussed before, a lot of the others who become very prominent and often drown them out. But this comes from the people who aren't idiots. And I've seen this in a lot of different ways. I've gotten this addressed to me over the years in a lot of different forms, but they all tend to be similar. And they tend to be kind of like this. Without God, we can still value, and then fill in the blank. Usually it's some version of like the species flourishing, societal order, happiness of those around us, or the people we love, etc. So it tends to be something along those lines, or, possibly those things ranked, according to preference or whatever. And so, those things, so it said, can form a morality in the sense of a plan for action. And so what's wrong with that, they say. And here's the thing. Yes, they can. You can form a plan of action or a way of making choices based upon whatever value you want to state, pick, some collection of them. No fool ever doubted this. That's not what we religious people mean when we talk about how atheism does not really, permit morality. See, the thing is, it's not like we believe that atheists are going to, once you stop believing in God and realize that, if God is dead, all things are permitted, just to freeze. And then, never move again. That's not what we mean at all. What we mean is that morality, proper morality, and what you get in the religious context for morality, is something that forms a universal, undeniable morality. Now, undeniable in the sense of, if you deny it, you are wrong. And universal in the sense of, for all people, everywhere, no matter what their preferences, no matter what their values, if they deny it, they're wrong. We're not talking about something that, forces you to be good. There is such thing as free will. Morality is, in fact, something that, is useful for categorizing actions into good and evil, such that you can then, choose to be good or choose to be evil. That means you can choose to be evil. Morality is not something that forces you to. And when I say right and wrong, what I mean is that what we really mean, although it often, it's a little dangerous to put it this way, for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But to make it intelligible, right is something that leads to happiness, and wrong leads to misery. So good is what leads to happiness, real happiness, true happiness, and evil is something that leads to misery. Now, of course, we mean long term. We don't mean in the short term, because, a great metaphor is candy. Candy tastes delicious, but it's terrible for your health. It'll wreck your health. It's pleasure for a moment, and then makes the rest of your life worse. Obviously not in tiny amounts. Tiny amounts don't do anything. But, if you eat really large amounts of candy, eat 3 pounds of chocolate a day, you're going to be miserable before too long. So, it's that sort of thing. It's a long-term thing. Now, there's an immediate problem that kind of comes up if you don't believe in the immortality of the soul, which is that, as a famous economist once put it, when talking about, economic projections in the long term is kind of iffy because in the long run, we're all dead. And that kind of gets in the way of doing, really long-term things if there isn't if the long term eventually stops. If in the long term we're all dead, there is no real such thing as long-term happiness, especially because how long you're going to live is unpredictable, but that's sort of a side note. And I understand that there are lots of objections. I'm not going to delve into them. But just suffice it to say, to answer all those objections, that there's a reason why the phrase rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic is not, used to describe a noble struggle against the odds, but rather an exercise in complete pointless futility. You can take it to be a noble struggle if you want, but let's I don't know, be a little realistic about what rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic actually is. Okay, so the children's version of this universal morality, where good leads to happiness and evil leads to misery, is universal reward and punishment. You can think of this sort of like Santa Claus, and the children's version of God's relationship to morality is basically like a super Santa Claus, right? So for somebody who is 5, 6 years old, they can't really understand very much. So you sort of explain to them that if you do right, you'll get good things, and if you do something that's wrong, then you'll be punished. And to children, God gets explained in this sort of way. But it does have the central criteria that I mentioned earlier. If somebody who can see everything, knows everything you do right and everything you do wrong, and everything you do right will be rewarded and everything you do wrong will be punished, you have that criteria that doing what is right will lead to long-term happiness, and doing what is evil will lead to long-term misery. Now, there are, practical problems with this. Mostly if you've lived long enough to actually see what it's like, people get bored of pleasure and people get inured to pain. So there's some real problems with this if you take, push it overly literally. There's a reason why it's given to children, right? The adult version of this, that's to say, the actual real full version, reality, not, simplifications for children that they can understand, is what's called natural law. Now, natural law, a good example of natural law is if you stay underwater for too long with no breathing, without any sort of air or breathing apparatus of any kind, you will die. This is not, some arbitrary punishment from somewhere. This flows out of the nature of the fact that the way we stay alive uses oxygen, and the way we get oxygen uses lungs to do gas exchange with the air. So if there's no air available, we can't do that. And I actually forget which will kill you first, whether it's carbon dioxide buildup or oxygen deprivation. But in any event, whichever one of those will kill you first when you can't do gas exchange with the air, it's not some arbitrary punishment that someone, just really powerful decided and, will then zap you if you contradict what they said. It flows entirely out of your nature. There is no possible world in which you can be a creature that needs to do gas exchange in order to live, and then be in a place where you can't do gas exchange, like underwater, and still live. It's inherent. That's natural law. It's a really simple example of natural law. Again, just to give another example that's very, very simple. If you cut off your legs, you won't be able to walk. You can say the wages of cutting off your legs is immobility, if you want. Not complete immobility, obviously, just, you can still go on your arms, but not on your legs. Okay, so those are examples of natural law. There are cases where the effect follows necessarily from the cause, because that is the nature of the thing that you are. Now, this gets more complicated when you look at actions on others. And I don't mean the effects on them, I mean the effects on you of your actions on others. Again, like this is not a, semester-long course in philosophy. This is a several-minute-long video, so I kind of have to skip ahead a lot. Basically, the short version is, in order to accomplish this, you need a telos. It's the Greek word for end, the natural end, like the purpose for which something exists. Like, for example, it's really easy to see in tools. The telos of a hammer is to hit things. The telos of a screwdriver is to turn screws, or to drive screws, if you want to put it. The telos of a claw hammer is to hit things with one end and pull out nails with the other. The telos of a 13-in-1 screwdriver is, 13 related things. So, with tools, it becomes very simple. With people, it's more, far more complex, but the same basic kind of idea. Good is that which fulfills your telos. Evil is that which contradicts it. So, to give a few concrete examples, lying contravenes our telos' truth-telling things. We have the ability to communicate in order to communicate truth, and our happiness, in part, derives from fulfilling this, of communicating truth. The more we lie, we're first off not communicating truth, and another thing, we actually destroy our ability to enjoy, appreciate telling the truth. Murder contravenes our natural end of caring for each other. Theft not only contravenes our natural end of caring for each other, or telos of caring for each other, but also it contravenes our telos of building things for ourselves. So we kind of screw ourselves, theft screws ourselves over doubly in this case. I'm not, by the way, saying that theft is therefore worse than murder. I'm just talking about I'm not talking about how much it contradicts things. I'm talking about the way in which it contradicts things. It contradicts our nature. So in all of these things, you can see, given that if this is our natural end, if our natural end is to be a truth-telling thing, to be a thing that cares for other creatures, to be a thing that builds things for ourselves, then these things will frustrate those purposes, will diminish our ability to enjoy those things, and therefore necessarily of themselves lead to misery. Now, I'm not saying that, one of these things on their own will just utterly destroy us. Clearly, that doesn't actually happen. And that's why, incidentally, within Christianity, it is possible to do something like repent. It's also why there's gradations like venial sin, or forgivable, is what venial means, sin, and mortal sin, or sin that will actually kill you. So, it's not that one contravening of your nature will just utterly destroy you, but that it is damage, and then damage can accumulate, and so on. That is how you have a natural law version of morality, wherein lying to people, communicating, now, when I say lying, I don't mean, incidentally, saying things that are not, literally true. Because, of course, communication is about conveying the truth, and how some other person might take something that you say to someone is not related to whether or not you actually conveyed the truth to them. So, if somebody says, "How do I look in this dress?" and you tell them that they look nice, the main thing you are communicating is not exactly an objective appraisal of a person in a dress relative to all art within the world, but rather like, are you suitable for the occasion in question? Will people reject you as human, or will they accept you as human? And saying, yes, you look nice in that dress means that they will accept you as human. And in a case where people will accept the person as human, you have told the truth, even if not precisely literally. I'm not talking about, literal stuff. I'm talking about actually lying. As in, like, a person is asking, do I look nice in this? And you tell them yes, when you know that, in fact, they will be utterly rejected. Everyone is going to despise them for wearing what they wore, and you are setting them up for utter humiliation. That's a lie, because you have communicated no truth whatsoever. So, just to be clear, it's kind of important in these matters, even though that's a little bit of a digression. So that's where doing that sort of thing, where you really utterly violate the truth, it damages you over time, so that you're unable to eventually even appreciate, truth. And so, as I said, therefore, just to sort of bring that to a very sharp point, in this manner, it is the case for everybody that lying is conducive to misery, precisely because it is destroying their ability to be happy according to one of the only modes they have for happiness. Since having a nature, that means they have several, modes for happiness, such as appreciating goodness and telling the truth and taking care of people and so on, taking care of other creatures and so on. And so by destroying these things, they're destroying their ability to be happy. All of this does become a mess, by the way, if you don't have any sort of savior, because we obviously live in a fallen world where we cause ourselves damage. And what can possibly happen to a creature that's been damaged where there's no way to repair them is kind of an unsolvable problem. This is where Christianity solves this, because it is possible to be repaired. But that's sort of a side note. It's not really important to the main point. Okay, so the thing about this teleological approach, which satisfies the need to have a universal morality wherein if you think that lying is going to make you happy, you are simply wrong, because lying for the reasons mentioned before. There's no way that lying is going to promote your ability to tell the truth. Okay. So it fulfills all that, but the problem is a teleology requires a creator, because having natural ends requires a purpose. It requires a rational ordering of the universe according to this purpose. You don't get that without a creator God. Without a creator God to rationally order the world, there is no rational ordering, there is no end to things. Things have no natural direction. Now, I don't think this is actually very common, but some people might try to say, well, what about evolution? But the problem is that evolution is pretty undirected. If you want to say that evolution is directed at anything, evolution is directed at maximizing population sizes over some time frame. It's really unclear. Because that's the problem, that, you have species will get like big populations and then they'll go extinct. And was that successful or was that a failure? Was it successful before it was a failure? Even so, judging by population size, probably the most successful thing evolution's ever come up with are bacteria, or possibly funguses. I'm not sure. In any event, human beings, with the mere, 7 billion of us, I think. I didn't get enough sleep recently. We're kind of just a small little, side experiment, evolutionarily speaking. I mean, the bacteria outnumber us in a ludicrous degree. I mean, heck, even beetles outnumber us to a tremendous degree. So in terms of maximizing population size, we're an utter failure pretty much no matter what in comparison to a lot of other things. Maybe the best thing we could do is turn into bacteria. I mean, not that we could. Even worse, nobody has any idea of how to maximize population size over whatever time frame. Because so much is dependent on circumstance anyhow. So, as you can see, just look around the animal world. Some things try, enormous broods of children that they don't take care of. Some things, try, one child every once in a very long time and take a lot of care of it. Elephants, whales, us, etc. Which one of those works? I don't know. I mean, I think more frogs than there are humans, so, maybe we're once again just not doing this very well. In any event, so that's the thing with evolution. I mean, you could try, sort of, but in any event, it's not conducive to the individual happiness of a person anyhow, even if you take it as a direction. The famous phrase, evolution doesn't care if you're happy. It only cares about some number of descendants at some point down the road or something. So that won't work. So you need a creator to rationally order the universe such that we can actually have a nature that will be sustained and fulfilled and so on. Because the problem, and as I stated many times before, as many people have stated many times before, is that if it's possible to be happy being evil, ultimately happy, fully happy, truly happy, however exactly you want to phrase it, not transitory passing stuff that leads to misery, but like really as happy as you possibly can be, being evil, then there's absolutely no reason for a person not to be evil. For them, being evil is in a sense being good. In that sense that their being good has no attraction to them, whereas being evil would. Like their best bet is to be evil in that circumstance, because, well, that's the thing that maximizes their happiness. And so you can't possibly tempt them with anything, because that would be making them less happy. You can't offer them anything, etc. So all you get left with, if it is possible for a person to be maximally happy for them, being evil, is that might makes right. You can then force them to stop doing what they're doing, but there's no possible way of talking them out of it. Again, assuming, they're thinking clearly and so on. If they happen to value evil and derive, enjoyment from evil, if they actually did this, you could not possibly talk them out of it. You could not possibly show them to be wrong, because there's no sense in which they would be wrong by choosing to do evil. There's just no way whatever. They'd in fact be right in that way, which is why it's not possible. And this, by the way, you can see, if you want to see a great place where someone who's not Christian talks about this and comes to this conclusion, read Plato's Republic. It's one of the central questions of Plato's Republic that Socrates is asking people: is it better to be good or to be evil? Socrates gives more or less the answer I just gave, by the way. But in any event, hey, you want to see somebody who's not a Christian, who was, in fact, incidentally, if you're an atheist and, this matters to you, heck, he was executed for impiety against the gods at his time. And obviously he wasn't Christian because he was a few hundred years before Christ. So, there you go. There's somebody who's, not a Christian, executed for impiety against the pagan gods, looking to the question of, is it better to be good or evil? Go read them. And, So, okay, that's the problem with the atheist morality Sort of you can be, if God is dead, all things are permitted. No, it isn't. We can value X. You can, but it doesn't answer the question that any of we religious people are trying to pose. It doesn't in any way, in fact, address if God is dead, all things are permitted. It's basically just noting that one of the things that's permitted is choosing to act according to some plan. And yes, of course, if all things are permitted, choosing to act according to some particular plan is also permitted. That plan might well involve forbidding certain actions. It is perfectly permitted to act, to restrict yourself in that fashion if that's what you want to do, if all things are permitted. But what we mean is that if, God is dead, then all things are permitted. Not, it's impossible to choose to not do things. So, all right. Hope that helps to clarify the issue. I'm not expecting anyone to, go off and become a Christian as a result of this, but just to clarify the issue of, what is it we actually mean when we say that if God is dead, all things are permitted. And why is it that the atheist answer, rings so, a common atheist answer rings so very hollow for us. So hopefully this helps explain that. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.